I still remember the sound that morning. Not a crash, not an alarm, nothing dramatic. Just silence. A strange, hollow kind of silence that comes when something is missing before your brain has even understood what it is. I stepped outside expecting to see my wife, Emily, already pulling out of the driveway, waving at me through the windshield like she always did before heading to the elementary school where she worked as a counselor. But instead, I saw her standing perfectly still. Coffee mug in her hand, steam rising into the cold air, eyes fixed on the empty slab of concrete where her car should have been. At first, I thought maybe she'd walked down the street. Maybe she parked on the curb. Maybe she left earlier than usual and I simply forgot. But the moment she spoke, all those maybes disappeared. My car's gone. There was no panic in her voice. Not yet. It was flat, stunned, like her mind hadn't caught up with her eyes. I rushed to her side, scanning the street as if the car might magically appear if I stared long enough. Nothing. Just a quiet neighborhood and the first hints of morning light stretching across the asphalt. "We should call the police," she said, her voice tightening. "It has to be stolen." Her hands trembled slightly, the coffee slushing. Her car wasn't expensive or fancy. A simple silver sedan with a dent on the side and stickers from the school kid she counseled. But it was hers. Her independence, her routine, her lifeline to the job she loved. Before I could respond, I noticed something taped crookedly to our mailbox. A white slip flapping gently in the breeze. I pulled it off, and my stomach dropped. Vehicle removed by Lakeside HOA for violation. Violation? Violation of what? We weren't perfect homeowners, but we were responsible. We kept our lawn mowed, our trash cans off the street, our dues paid on time. We were the kind of people who held the door open for strangers and sent thank you notes after borrowing a ladder. I showed the paper to Emily, and she just stared at it, her eyes slowly filling. "You're kidding me," she whispered. "They towed my car? For what?" We walked to the street, checking the sidewalk, the driveway, the curb, searching for any sign of violation. But nothing made sense. She had parked in the same place every night for 5 years. Never once had anyone said a word. She pulled out her phone to call the tow company listed on the slip. They confirmed the car was there and that the fee would be $100 if she picked it up within 24 hours. The man on the phone sounded bored, like this was just another day at work, not the unraveling of someone else's. Emily's jaw clenched. "Do you know why it was towed?" she asked. "All we know is the HOA ordered it," the man said. "Says here it was blocking community access." "Blocking what?" she said, louder now. "It was in my driveway." "That's between you and them." She hung up without another word. I could see the hurt building in her. Not just frustration. Something deeper. Something personal. We walked back inside, and she set her coffee down with a shaky hand. "This isn't right," she said. "This isn't a mistake. They don't pull a car out of a private driveway unless someone wanted it gone." She wasn't wrong. The HOA president, Mitch Dalton, had been giving us a strange kind of passive-aggressive attention for months. Little notes about trash cans being too visible. Reminders about proper compliance. Notices about parking guidelines placed on our door even when our car wasn't there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I tried to calm her, but the truth was I felt the same burning mix of anger and disbelief. Her job opened in an hour. She had no way to get there. She sat down at the edge of the kitchen table and put her face in her hands. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked defeated. All this over $100 tow. But even then, before everything that followed, before the meetings and the documents and the judge's ruling, I should have known something was about to shift. Because Emily wasn't someone who stayed down long. When something tried to break her, she didn't crumble. She calculated. And that morning, while she sat recovering from the shock, the first sparks of that calculation began forming, quietly, determinedly, in her mind. Mitch Dalton wasn't the kind of man who knocked on your door to introduce himself. He was the kind who left flyers on your porch telling you what you were doing wrong. Most of the neighborhood avoided him, not out of fear exactly, but because dealing with him always felt like walking into a conversation you didn't ask for. He carried himself like a sheriff in a town that didn't need one, clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses on even when it was cloudy. I didn't pay him much attention at first. Most people don't think about their HOA president unless they are forced to. But over time, little things started adding up. The tone of his emails, the way he talked to people during community meetings, like every question was a challenge to his authority, and the way he'd stand in front of your house a few seconds too long, staring, taking notes. Emily tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. She always saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. But even she couldn't ignore what happened after she questioned the HOA fee increase at last month's meeting. "They're raising it by 20%, she had said calmly. "Can we see the breakdown of where that money goes?" Mitch had stiffened like she'd insulted him. "Everything is documented," he said, tapping his pen against the table. "The board has approved it." "But where is it listed?" Emily asked, not confrontational, just practical. "We should all be able to see the expenses." His jaw tightened. "It's handled internally." After that meeting, the notices started showing up. First, it was a warning about visible garden tools left on the porch, Emily's small watering can. Then a reminder that our trash cans were 1 foot outside designated placement. Then a note about parking alignment, even though our car was perfectly within our driveway. At the time, we told ourselves it was coincidence, just a strict guy enforcing rules. But after the tow, there was no denying it anymore. The man had a grudge, and he wasn't shy about using his authority to make it known. When we went to confront him the day Emily's car disappeared, he didn't even act surprised to see us walking toward his house. He was outside clipping the small hedge by his porch, wearing gloves that looked far too clean for yard work. He didn't look up when we stopped in front of him. "Morning," he said, like he wasn't responsible for the car-shaped hole in our driveway. "You had my wife's car towed," I said, holding out the slip like evidence in a trial. He paused mid-snip, then finally looked up over the rim of his sunglasses. "If it was towed," he said slowly, "it must have been in violation." "It was in our driveway," Emily said, her voice tight. "Same as always." He shrugged. "Driveway ends at the sidewalk. That portion is community access. HOA rules clearly state vehicles can't obstruct that." "That's not an obstruction," she snapped. "No one even walks there." "That's not for you to decide," he replied, and there was a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I could see Emily's hand shaking. Not with fear, with fury. Emily never raised her voice, but her strength came in quiet waves that settled into her words. "You did this on purpose," she said softly. "You've been targeting us." "Targeting?" He gave a laugh that didn't sound real. I enforce the rules equally. If you feel singled out, perhaps you should review the guidelines. Ignorance isn't an excuse." And then he turned his back on us. He actually turned away while we were still standing there, as if we were children interrupting his gardening time. Emily took a step forward, but I held her arm gently. It wouldn't matter what we said. Mitch had already decided we were the enemy in whatever imaginary war he was fighting. On the walk back home, I saw the exact moment her hurt switched into something sharper. Her jaw set. Her eyes steadied. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just said, "If Mitch wants to play by the book, then let's read the book." I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just walked inside, pulled the HOA bind off the shelf, a thick, dusty manual no one ever opened, and sat at the table with a determination I'd only seen in her a handful of times. "We're not letting him get away with this," she said, flipping pages. "I'm done letting people like him push us around." It was subtle, but something in the air shifted that day. A line had been crossed. Not just by Mitch, but by us too. We were stepping out of the role of quiet, compliant neighbors and into something else. Emily wasn't just going to fight back. She was going to do it legally, smartly, and in a way that Mitch Dalton would never see coming. And knowing her, I should have realized then that this was only the beginning. Emily treated the HOA binder like it was a puzzle she'd been waiting her whole life to solve. Pages scattered across the dining table. Sticky notes stuck to her sleeves, highlighter marks glowing under the kitchen light. I had never seen her so focused, so calm and yet so fueled. There was no shouting, no dramatic statements. Just quiet determination, the kind that makes you step back because you know something's about to shift. She started with the basics, parking rules, towing procedures, definitions of community access. But she didn't stop there. She pulled out the financial statements the HOA mailed out twice a year. These were the documents most homeowners ignored, assuming they were routine. But Emily didn't ignore them. Not anymore. "This doesn't add up," she said one evening, rubbing her temples. "Look at this line. Emergency towing contract. It's showing thousands of dollars paid out. But who are they paying?" "Probably a tow company," I said. "That's what I thought. But they don't list a vendor name. It's blank. Blank. The kind of blank that doesn't look like an error, more like something someone didn't want printed." Over the next week, Emily became almost investigative in the way she searched. She went online, checked business registries, cross-referenced our HOA's corporate filings. She even called the county records office on her lunch break. One night she looked up from her laptop, eyes wide. "Oh my God!" My heart dropped. "What?" She turned the screen toward me. A business listing appeared on the page. Dalton Services Towing and Recovery. The owner was listed as Mitch Dalton. She didn't need to say a word. The realization hit both of us at the same time. The HOA president wasn't just enforcing the rules. He was profiting from them. Every car he ordered towed brought money back to him. Every violation he documented translated directly into cash in his pocket. "He's been towing people's cars and paying himself with HOA funds," Emily whispered. "That's a conflict of interest. It violates the bylaws. It's actually illegal for board members to profit this way." She leaned back in her chair, stunned, not angry, not triumphant, just stunned by the sheer audacity of it. Over the next few days, Emily gathered everything: printouts, dates, emails, the towing slip, the HOA's own financial statements. She didn't want assumptions. She wanted proof. Hard, undeniable proof. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, she was ready. I've never seen her look so composed walking into a room. People were sitting in the folding chairs arranged in a messy circle, chatting quietly. Mitch stood at the front, clipboard tucked under his arm, wearing that same expression of someone who thought he was in complete control. The moment he saw us enter, his eyes narrowed slightly. Maybe he thought we were there to complain. Maybe he thought we'd beg for the tow fee back. Whatever he expected, it wasn't what happened next. During the open floor portion, Emily raised her hand. Her voice was steady when she said, "I have some questions about the towing contract listed in the HOA financials." Mitch stiffened. "Those matters are internal," he said quickly. "If you have concerns, you can email the board." "I already did," she said. "But since you didn't respond, I'll ask here." A murmur rippled through the room. Emily laid the papers on the table, copies of the financial statements, business registry records, and a printout of Dalton Services. "Why?" she asked, looking straight at him. "Is the HOA paying towing fees to a company you personally own?" The room fell silent. You could hear someone's keys clink against their chair. Mitch blinked twice, caught completely off guard. "That's a private business matter," he sputtered. "No," Emily said calmly. "It's a violation of the HOA bylaws. You cannot contract your own company for HOA services. It's a conflict of interest. And you approved your own payments." People turned to look at him. Even the board members, who usually nodded along with everything he said, looked uneasy. One of them cleared her throat. "Mitch, is this true?" He tried to talk his way out of it, said the towing contract was historic, that he was only helping the community, that it wasn't really a conflict because he didn't profit much. But it didn't matter. The papers spoke louder than he could. Within minutes, the board asked him to step outside so they could discuss the matter without him. He refused at first, but eventually he stormed out, muttering under his breath. When the door closed behind him, the room erupted into whispers, questions, anger, disbelief. Emily just sat there quietly, hands folded, breathing steadily. After 20 long minutes, the board came back in. The decision was unanimous. Mitch was suspended pending investigation. All towing authorizations were frozen. No more surprise tows. No more shady contracts. No more self-written checks. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, relieved but not satisfied, because for her, this wasn't about winning a point. It was about justice. And the fight wasn't over yet. In the days after Mitch's suspension, our house felt strangely lighter, like a storm cloud had lifted but the thunder was still rumbling somewhere in the distance. Emily kept every document neatly stacked in a box on the dining table, labeled with almost comical precision, "Tow evidence." She said it was temporary, but every time she walked past it, her eyes hardened just a little. It wasn't enough that Mitch had been suspended. Her car had still been taken. She had still been humiliated. And she had still lost 2 days of work trying to deal with the fallout. The freeze on towing rights didn't erase what he had done. It was a Saturday morning when everything clicked into place. Emily sat cross-legged on the couch with her laptop, hair tied in a messy bun, half-eaten toast on the coffee table. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard her say, "Wait, hold on." I turned off the faucet. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. She was squinting at something on the screen, scrolling, frowning, scrolling again. Then she said, "He didn't renew it." "Didn't renew what?" She spun the laptop around. It was a public database listing commercial insurance policies. Mitch's tow company. His commercial insurance expired 3 months ago. I leaned closer. "Is that important?" "It's huge," she said. "He can't legally operate a tow truck without this. Without insurance, he can't enforce contracts, can't tow vehicles, can't charge fees. Everything is done in the last 3 months is unlawful." Her voice was sharp now, energized. "And if he towed my car during that time, then that tow wasn't just unethical. It was illegal." Those words hit me like a shock. Unlawful. Illegal. Suddenly this wasn't a neighborhood spat anymore. This was something bigger, something with consequences he couldn't hide behind a clipboard. Emily spent the rest of the weekend piecing together a timeline, dates of tows, payment trails, HOA meeting minutes, public insurance records. She even took printed screenshots from the insurance database in case it mysteriously disappeared. I joked about her becoming a detective, but the truth was, she was better than one. She didn't get emotional. She got thorough. And she didn't assume, she verified. Monday morning, she filed a small claims case for the wrongful tow, lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. She collected every scrap of proof and stapled it all into a packet an inch thick. I drove her downtown, and she walked into that courthouse like someone walking into a job she knew she was perfect for. 2 weeks later, the hearing date arrived. Mitch didn't show. Maybe he thought it wasn't serious. Maybe he thought his title still protected him. Or maybe he couldn't face the possibility of losing in a room where rules actually meant something. The judge read through Emily's documents 1 page at a time. He asked a few questions, but honestly, Emily had prepared so thoroughly that there wasn't much left to clarify. When she explained the expired commercial insurance, the judge raised his eyebrows. "That alone," he said, "is grounds for damages." He ruled entirely in her favor. The judgment, $8,500. I remember the exact moment the clerk handed Emily the ruling. She breathed out slowly, almost shakily, like she had been holding that breath for weeks. "You may seize assets equal to the amount owed," the clerk added. At first, those words didn't sink in. But then Emily looked at me, eyes widening just a fraction. "Does that mean?" I nodded. "Yes, it means the tow truck." There was a strange silence between us, half disbelief, half something close to poetic justice. The very truck that had hauled her car away could legally become hers. A week later, a court officer met us outside Mitch's property. It was late afternoon, warm but breezy. Mitch's tow truck sat behind his house under a crooked metal awning, the Dalton Services logo still visible on the door. When he saw us walking up with the officer, he rushed outside. "You can't take that," he yelled, voice cracking. "That's my truck." "It's court-ordered," the officer said, handing him the paperwork. Mitch's face went pale. He looked between the officer, the tow truck, and Emily, as if waiting for someone to admit it was a prank. But it wasn't a joke. It wasn't revenge, either. It was accountability. The officer attached a notice to the windshield. Emily stood quietly the whole time. No smirk. No triumphant stare. Just a calm, steady expression that said, "This is what fairness looks like." And when the tow truck, the same one that had dragged her car away, was pulled up onto a flatbed and taken to auction. I watched Mitch slump against his porch railing. His clipboard was nowhere in sight. Emily turned to me, letting out a slow breath. "I guess he parked it in the wrong place," she said softly. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Word spreads fast in the neighborhood, faster than any official notice the HOA ever mailed out. And in our case, it spread even before the tow truck reached the auction lot. By the next morning, neighbors who barely nodded at us before were stopping on their morning walks just to say, "I heard what happened," or "Good for you guys," or "It's about time someone stood up to him." At first, Emily didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She just kept giving small smiles, saying things like, "It was all legal," or "I just followed the rules." But people weren't thanking her for the legality. They were thanking her for the courage. One older woman from 2 streets over even came by carrying a plate of cinnamon rolls wrapped in foil. "He had my grandson's truck towed last year," she said, voice trembling. "We couldn't prove anything. I'm so glad someone finally did." Emily didn't know what to say. She just hugged her. Later that afternoon, 3 families showed up to ask how they could request an internal audit of HOA finances. Another neighbor, a quiet guy who usually kept to himself, dropped off a stack of emails he'd saved from Mitch. Emails where Mitch had threatened him with daily fines over lawn height, even though his grass was shorter than half the neighborhood's. Emily filed everything away neatly, promising nothing but listening to everything. Within a week, the HOA called a special meeting. But this time, things were different. This time, the room wasn't filled with polite, avoidant silence. This time, people were ready to speak. Emily and I arrived early, but the folding chairs were already half-filled. We could feel the shift in the air, people whispering, shaking their heads, waving to each other across the room. It wasn't anger anymore. It was unity, a sense that everyone had been carrying the same weight for years and suddenly realized they weren't alone. When the board walked in, they looked nervous. One of the newer members cleared her throat and said, "We have reviewed the concerns brought forward by residents." She didn't say Emily's name, but her eyes kept drifting in her direction. "We will be holding elections for a new president. Until then, all enforcement actions will be paused." A wave of relief moved through the room. Even I felt it, like a tight chest finally loosening. Someone asked about the budget. Someone else asked about fines Mitch had issued. Another asked whether he would be reimbursing residents for improper charges. People weren't afraid anymore. They were curious. They were empowered. They wanted transparency, fairness, accountability, things Mitch had never offered. The board promised a full audit, open access to financial documents, and a rewritten set of rules that would be publicly reviewed before approval. People applauded, not wildly, but sincerely. For the first time since we'd moved in, it felt like the HOA belonged to the community, not to one man with a clipboard. After the meeting, a young couple approached Emily. The wife said, "We were thinking of moving. Now, we're going to stay. Because of what you did." Emily didn't cry often, but her eyes glistened at that. As for the tow truck, the auction went smoother than expected. The exact amount earned? $8,500. The same amount the judge awarded. The symmetry of it felt almost poetic. Emily paid off the judgment, then donated part of the leftover funds to the school library where she worked, a gesture that surprised no one who truly knew her. One evening, a week after everything settled, we stood on our driveway watching the sunset paint the rooftops in soft orange. The air was calm, almost peaceful. Emily leaned against me and let out a sigh that sounded like release. "All that over $100 tow," she said quietly. I shook my head. It wasn't about the tow. She looked up at me, waiting. "It was about someone thinking they could push you around," I said. "Push all of us around. And getting away with it because nobody challenged him." She nodded slowly. "I didn't want revenge," she said. "I just wanted fairness." "And you got it," I told her. "Not just for us, for everybody." She smiled then, a soft, tired smile, the kind someone was after winning a long battle they never planned to fight. Birds chirped in the distance. Cars drove past. The world kept moving, but something in our neighborhood had settled into a new shape. Steadier, safer, more honest. The lesson didn't come wrapped in triumph or fireworks. It came quietly, like justice often does. Through perseverance, through truth, through people who refuse to stay silent when something isn't right. And sometimes, justice doesn't roar in with sirens. Sometimes it arrives on wheels, a tow truck being driven away not by the man who abused his power, but by the consequences he never saw coming.